People's beliefs are challenged every day about our human existence within the physical world. We can live in fear and be locked into beliefs that make us feel safe, or we can become curious and begin to question all that we have learned up until now. Because of the scientists, explorers, and pioneers of consciousness, we are beginning to believe that we are more than our physical body. Now is the time to stop believing and start experiencing what is beyond the physical.
Think about radio waves or television waves. We can sit here and I could tune into a radio station and maybe it's a news station. There's some guy somewhere who is broadcasting news. I can change the dial and it'll be a country music station. There's somebody somewhere who's playing country music. I can change it again and I can get pop music. I don't see those other dimensions, but when I tune into them, when I direct my perception, then those worlds become real. They come to life. Where are they? They're everywhere. They're being broadcast everywhere. So for me, it's not very much of a stretch of imagination to think that it isn't limited to radio and TV, that there are other worlds that are happening simultaneously right here. So then it becomes a question of how do we tune into them? How do we shift our perception so that we can begin to interact with them in a meaningful way?
So there's a big, complex world out there in the world of consciousness. The consciousness system didn't just put all its eggs in this one basket. You know, there's other virtual realities, and they're all different. They have different rules. They're not all the same rule sets. When you take this as a premise, then you can explain a lot of things that are now unexplainable.
If you'll look hard enough, you will find out something. You will find out that you are more than your physical body. Now, many people find this out through a healing experience. Many people find this out through connection with guidance, through an out-of-body experience, through a psychokinetic experience, or through a remote viewing experience.
97% of humanity believes in the concept of a soul. But yet, for some reason, the idea of experiencing what we truly are seems alien to people. There's a disconnect in our society that's big time. And it's unfortunate. Based on my experience from thousands of out-of-body experiences over the last 35 years, I realize that it's a multidimensional universe and that this physical world is just the epidermis layer. We all have the ability to actually move beyond our dense exterior, our facade, and start to explore these other dimensions.
It is only once you move beyond the physical body that you lose the fear of death. Robert Monroe was a pioneer in this type of exploration. He was a successful business executive and noted pioneer in the investigation of human consciousness. In 1958, Monroe coined the term out-of-body experience as he began experiencing a state of consciousness separate and apart from his physical body.
Most people would recognize as a classic out-of-body experience is when you believe yourself to be separate from the body, and that belief is reinforced very strongly because you look back and see your body. Now, this happens in near-death experiences, in surgery cases, or in automobile cases where people have a very definite experience of saying, I am separate from my body because look, there's my body right down there. that was the kind of classic out-of-body experience that Bob Monroe first had. One night he felt himself bouncing or hitting something hard and flat, and he thought it might be the sheets of his bed or the covers of his bed. And it turned out to be the ceiling itself, because it was rough and textured, and he thought that there was a fountain next to him, and he couldn't figure out why there was a fountain in his bed. It turned out to be the chandelier hanging over the bed. And when he looked down, there was this strange man in bed with his wife, and he couldn't figure out what was going on until he realized that was him down there in the bed. And he was quite panicked about, this is dying, I'm dying now. So he tried very hard, and he pulled himself through the air, swimming through the air, and finally fit himself like a glove back into his body and sat up in bed quite startled and panicked and worried about this whole thing.
So in the beginning, he was quite convinced that he was dying. And he went through numerous medical tests and even psychological tests to see if he was crazy or not. And all the tests proved that he was in relatively good health and he was pretty sane. Now, you have to remember, in the 1950s, this was a time when nobody was talking about that kind of experience. There was no such thing as the New Age movement. It wasn't part of our vocabulary. And so he was in the unfortunate position, or maybe fortunate for us, of really having to go it alone and find out for himself what this was all about.
During this period of time, he was part of the social world of New York. He was a young man, college graduate, looking for a job, and found himself in New York in the radio industry.
In fact, he was a producer of a very famous radio program called The Shadow. Many people from my generation and before remember that very well because it was a nationally broadcast series. There were things happening in his life that he simply didn't understand, and that he needed to find some way of bringing some kind of better awareness to what was going on.
After visiting doctors, going to different religious leaders, trying to understand what had happened to him, they talked about an Eastern tradition of going out of body. And Bob Monroe, if you really want to know more about this, you should go to the Far East and talk to the masters, because they seem to know something about this. Well, he didn't want to do that. He was a businessman in New York, the vice president of NBC Radio. He couldn't do that.
Once he began to get some assurances that perhaps his well-being was not in jeopardy, he started to get really curious about it. The fear started to drop away and the curiosity kicked in.
He began to experiment. Practicing in bed at night, he would feel a sense of vibration or a sense of becoming puffy, larger, and then reducing to size. And then this vibration would cease at some point, and he found that via what he called a second body, he would reach over and try reaching down through the floor, and then he would reach up through the ceiling, and eventually got brave enough to walk outside and then come back in to make sure he could still come back, and eventually would go to his neighbors and then come back real quick. And after time, he began to venture further and found that this whole local world that we know it is really pretty boring in comparison to all the places in the universe that he could discover in this state.
As Monroe was exploring these other dimensions in the universe, he began to journal his experiences. Several years after he started journaling, Bob Monroe had fallen ill and needed surgery on his carotid arteries, which at the time was considered a very risky procedure. In order to keep his journaling preserved, he gave his manuscript to a good friend of his in an effort to make sure his journaling was kept safe.
Well, he came out of surgery and he recovered, and weeks and months rolled by, and got in contact with his friend and said, well, I'd like to get my transcript back. I seem to be healed up now, and I'd like to continue my work. And he said, well, Mr. Monroe, this is such a fantastic work. I've given it to a publisher to look at, and they'd like to publish a book on this. Well, Bob was torn. Here he was, part of New York society, being very proper and doing all the right things to work his way up through New York society, sort of worried about, well, I don't want this to get out. This is my secret life. This is something else I'm doing. On the other hand, there was like a book. Somebody wants to publish a book. Well, that'd be kind of nice if somebody published a book. And maybe if they published a book, others would read it, and they could help me find out, what's this all about? What's this grand adventure I'm on? Maybe others have had this adventure, and maybe a book would be a good way to do that. And then the other party would come back and say, I don't know, I might lose my job if they found out about this.
In 1971, Robert Monroe's journaled accounts were published in his first book, called Journeys Out of the Body. It was the first book of its kind and brought a subject that wasn't being talked about much into the mainstream, allowing others to come forth to share their paranormal stories and out-of-body experiences.
I remember him telling me one time very vividly about he had been invited to a cocktail party with his boss and so forth and so on, and they were standing around in a high-rise apartment in New York, all with their cocktail glasses, and his boss said, hey, Bob, come over here. I want to ask you about that book you wrote. And he thought, oh, no, this is the end. NBC's going to fire me. It's going to be all over for me. And his boss said, my wife has this happen to her all the time, and she thinks this is just the greatest book she's ever read. Wanted to thank you for that. And so he was like, that was the first time at which he had a sense of relief that this is okay. It's really okay. I'm not going to be ostracized, or I'm not going to be locked up as being crazy, that this is really okay.
Throughout the next 20 years, Robert Monroe continued to explore, research, and teach others about expanded states of human consciousness and practical methods of enhancing human potential. He later wrote 2 more books titled Far Journeys and Ultimate Journey, which expanded upon his investigations and research of non-physical realities and the limits of what lies beyond the physical world.
When Bob left the New York scene, he first moved to Richmond, Virginia, and spent some time in Richmond doing different kinds of businesses, trying to find an interesting business to do now that he had made his millions in New York and moved to a quieter lifestyle in Richmond. Then he met and married his wife, Nancy, and they moved out to the Virginia countryside into a place called Whistlefield Farms, which is about 10 miles from where we are right now. He sought the help of people from the University of Virginia. He sought the help of friends and associates that he would met or would be referred to them. One was a very interesting physicist by the name of Tom Campbell.
Tom is the TC physicist described in Bob Monroe's second book, Far Journeys, and has been a serious explorer of the frontiers of reality, mind, consciousness, and psychic phenomena since the early 1970s.
I took a job, and my boss tossed Bob Monroe's book, Journeys Out of the Body. And because I was a physicist, he wanted to know, physicists study reality. He wanted to know what I thought about it. And I thought, wow, that's very interesting, but how do you know it's true? Maybe this guy's just making this stuff up to sell books. About a month or so later, the boss comes back and says, we know where Bob lives. He lives not far away. We're going to go visit him. Would you like to come? Of course, I did. Found Bob to be a very credible person. You can generally tell when people are trying to make impressions or put something over on you. He was just very open, very affable, kind of nice guy. He was wealthy in his own right. So he wasn't trying to make money on his books. He made 100 times what those books made in his job. So that wasn't obviously his point. And the more I talked with him, the more I realized that what Bob really wanted more than anything was to make himself, his experience, legitimate. He wanted to understand it. He wanted to turn out of body into science, something repeatable. That was a dream of his. So he had built this lab, and the lab was empty. It was just basically an empty building. And he was looking for some scientific talent, some credentials to help him put the lab together. So he asked the group of us, where I worked was, at the time, was full of engineers and scientists. And he's kind of asked, he says, well, you guys are all scientists and engineers. I'm building this lab. Any of you want to work there, want to help me put it together? Boy, my hand shot up in the air, instantly, and another guy's did as well.
That other person was Dennis Menerick, With a background in electrical engineering, Dennis would be a perfect contrast to Tom's knowledge of physics. Together, they began building Bob Monroe's lab. As construction progressed, Bob would teach Tom and Dennis his techniques of going out of body.
The deal we made with Bob is that we would help him put his lab together, and we would make sure that things were done according to good protocols, that the results would be believable, and that we would help him build his equipment and his things he needed to measure what was going on, and that he would help us learn what he knew how to do. He would help us learn the out-of-body, how to master altered states, and that sort of thing, and he agreed. So for the next 5 to maybe 8 years, this was probably about 1972 up to about 1980. We'd go out to the lab, we'd spend an hour or two building equipment, wiring things, soldering, making GSRs to to measure galvanic skin response. We got an old EEG for brain waves. We did some high impedance input voltmeters for changing the voltage on the skin and around the head. Just anything we could think of to measure. We really didn't know what might be useful to measure, so we just measured everything that we could. And then afterwards, Bob would come up, and Dennis Menerick and I would get in the booths, and he would teach us, at least try to guide us to having those experiences in altered states. And at this time, he had some background sounds that he played, but they were mostly just pink noise. And the pink noise was supposed to just help kind of settle your mind and let you not think about anything in particular.
Bob Monroe had suspicions that this pink noise, if enhanced somehow, could possibly help others go out of body. Bob looked through the past experiences in his life for the key element that possibly caused his out-of-body experiences to come so easily.
And he talks about being in a DC-3 aircraft, a very old and yet very reliable aircraft, which had 2 propellers. And the pilots were trained very carefully to adjust the pitch of the propellers and the RPMs of the engine correctly. Else, if they were slightly out of tune with one another, the pilots would be exposed to a wow, 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 wow sound as the 2 engines had this beat frequency oscillation. And they had had accidents with the pilots falling asleep. And so they said, you must make sure when you're listening, do not let that sound come through your engines. Adjust the RPMs and the pitch of the props so that that doesn't happen. So he remembered that as a sound concept in its ability to help people to go to sleep. And then he remembers riding on the train from Westchester County into the city to his job, where he would watch people nod off in the morning to sleep and notice that the sound of the train to go across the track seemed to rhythmically cause people to go to sleep.
I don't think that you could go to Bob Monroe's house and have a normal cocktail hour, because as soon as you would get there, within a few minutes, instead of a beer or something like that, he'd lead you into a room and slap a pair of headphones on your head and turn the light out and start fiddling with dials and knobs to see what effect sound might have on your awareness and what your reactions might be to that. So through countless hours of experimentation, he began to realize that sound could be used to start to aid and to direct these kinds of experiences.
Well, this was a popular time in which sleep learning was an in vogue kind of thing. It was one of those, today if we saw it on television, it'd be 1995, learn while you sleep, 1995. And it's a truly American way to try to get something for nothing. You know, if I don't have to study and work at it, if I could learn while I slept, that'd be a good idea. So there were a lot of products out there on the old 33 RPM records that had your mathematic tables on it, foreign language lessons on them, different dialogues with promises that all you had to do is play this 33 RPM record and you could learn while you were sleeping. And after a few years, scientists began to look at this. Is this true? All of these salesmen are out there marketing these things to the naive public. Is this true? Can you really learn while you're asleep? And the scientists found out that in stages of sleep, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and REM, that if you are in stage 1, stage 2, this very light stage of sleep, that you could actually test someone the next morning and they multiplication tables were remembered. Their vocabulary skills were improved. But if the person was allowed to go down to stage 3 or stage 4 sleep, it didn't work. So there was a little bit of something to this concept of sleep learning, but only if you could maintain this platform of the early hypnagogic stages of sleep, not down here in the unconscious stages of sleep. So Bob Monroe said, oh, maybe that would be a good thing to do. Maybe we could allow people to get into this balanced stage where the mind is awake, but the body is asleep. And then it began to develop that, this has something to do maybe with what happened to me. Here I was developing all these sounds, listening very carefully, exposing myself to all these sounds. I wonder if it carried over into that night when I was in the bedroom and I was floating out of my body. And so he began to think that maybe it was the sound experiments he'd done. So he started creating sounds, started creating different sound patterns to experiment with this mind awake, body asleep.
Through Tom, Dennis, and Bob's experimentation in the lab, measuring the different EEG brainwaves and patterns, they found that by placing different sounds into each ear, they discovered that 4 hertz seemed to be the right frequency to elicit this altered state and out-of-body experience. Bob had left the lab for a few weeks, and in his absence, Tom and Dennis worked with EEGs in order to recreate this 4 hertz oscillation. They were trying to test the 4 hertz theory.
We knew that Bob felt this 4 hertz oscillation just before he went out of body, so we were trying to see if we couldn't emulate that. Dennis and I worked at it, and Dennis actually is the one that came up with the Hemisync idea. He read it in a Scientific American article. He said, let's try this, see if it doesn't entrain the brainwaves. We wanted a way to entrain it down to the 4 hertz. We thought if this EEG was oscillating, if you could put almost all your energy into that 4 hertz, that might be something that would be a good idea to do. It's just our intuition. We really didn't know either. And the EEG is generally scattered over lots of frequency bands. It goes, delta is unconscious. Theta is like a meditation state. Alpha is kind of a calm, relaxed state. Then you get the beta, which is where we are now having a conversation. You have all these energy. When you look at your brain waves in the EEG, you have little electrodes that are attached all over your head. They measure this, and right now we would have about 80% of our energy would be in the beta state. Some would be in the alpha, and some would be in the theta. Probably none would be in the delta, or very little bit, would be there. So we found that this Hemisync, that what it is, it wasn't called Hemisync then. That was Bob's name. It was just binaural beats, and that puts a pure tone in the left ear. A pure tone is about 4 hertz off from the first tone in the right ear, and the 2 tones go in and actually mix at the corpus callosum, which is that part of the brain that separates the 2 hemispheres. It's where the cross connects are.
Now what happens is when those 2 signals are introduced to each ear, there's a third signal that's produced that is the difference between them. 100 and 104, the difference between them is 4 cycles per second. At 4 cycles per second, then the brain tends to want to kind of mimic that. Both of the halves of the brain start to work together.
So in that part of the brain, the one signal is actually mixing with the other signal and causing these oscillations at 4 hertz. And it made the EEG, the power under the curve in the 4 hertz area, just jump up tremendously. So it succeeded. And it also put us in an altered state that was just amazing, kind of the thing that we were looking for.
When we're beginning to explore some of these ranges of experience or ranges of perception, the funny thing is that the frequencies, the brainwave frequencies that we're looking at, are below the threshold of hearing. So it's a bit difficult if you want to use an audio technology and you can't hear it. So that's why Bob used the binaural beats. So if we're looking at 4 cycles per second, again, the difference between 100 and 104, then we're starting to move down into the delta range. And even though that's not something that we hear, the brain actually manufactures that third signal. In some ways, it's like if you've ever tuned a guitar. You get the 2 strings almost very close, but if they're not quite in tune, there will be sort of a wavering or a vibrato of a slower frequency. Now, that's a very simplistic explanation because, in fact, our signals have many, many layers to them, and so you won't hear just one frequency and just one beat. Not only are they layered, but they're also masked, so they're not going to be distracting to you, but they're still very, very effective.
A few weeks later, Bob Monroe came back to the lab, and Tom and Dennis showed him what they were able to emulate with the 4 Hz frequency, called binaural beats. This later became known as HemiSync, a product that launched Monroe's lab and workshops.
So he began to develop these tape programs and eventually said, you know, if I could just get 5,000 people, that would be a good experiment. 5,000 people to try this out and write down reports about what they experienced. Then I'd know. Let's make this a grand experience. We'll call it the M5000 program.
He sent out some flyers then and said, hey, we've got this new technology and we'd like to experiment with some people. Anybody interested? We had a lot of people interested. We wired a motel. Bob was in the cable business, so he got his cable truck out there and we wired a motel and we got all this stuff going. And it was a very incredible weekend where lots and lots of people were popped out of their bodies, were doing things, going places. And word got around, and pretty soon, instead of doing research, we were trainers. That just happens that way because there's so many people wanted to do it.
Well, it wasn't but a couple of years that we surpassed that 5,000 number. And now we do about 1,000 people a year through the Institute itself.
It got to where, like every weekend or every other weekend, here was a line of people that all wanted the experience. That kind of started to take over our lives. So Dennis and I both, after a bit, after other people were trained to do it and other people could do it, we backed out. After that, Bob put me on the board of directors, and I would come back occasionally when they had meetings. But basically, the Monroe Institute and I kind of went our own ways after that.
In Bob's curiosity, in Bob's investigation to find out what happened to him, created initially this whole idea that has grown decades later into what we have now as the Monroe Institute.
In 1995, at the age of 80, and after decades of research, Robert Monroe would make his final transition into the non-physical.
Soon after Bob died, he and I met. You know, I went up to meet him. He came once or twice to meet me, and we had a little conversation. It was very pleasant. It was more of a goodbye than anything else. And then Bob went off on his own way. Every once in a while, I still kind of tap into that energy, because you can still tap into that same energy and you can get his opinion if you'd like. Because, like I said, those models are very accurate. You know, it really is his opinion. It's the opinion he would have had, you know, when he was here. So I visit Bob in that sense some, and I occasionally will touch the energy as it is now. But, you know, Bob's moved on. He's doing something else now. We kind of got together for a goodbye and, you know, congratulations and, you know, so long sort of thing.
Bob's daughter, Lori Monroe, continued her father's research into consciousness and the mind's potential until her death in 2006. The Monroe Institute was going to need a new leader, a captain, someone who could steer the ship into the future. Skip Atwater was immediately appointed acting director after Lori's death and would later become president. Skip, who had started in 1988 at the Institute as the lab director, recalls how he first met Bob Monroe in the late 1970s, working for the U.S. government as a counterintelligence specialist in the Army. His job was detecting and preventing enemy spy activity.
And the idea is we would go to different United States, U.S. military facilities, research and development programs, and pretend we were a foreign intelligence service and attack them, trying to get as much information as we could about them, mimicking a threat so that we could show the commander, this is what your picture looks like to the enemy. So it was a chance for that commander then to adjust his security posture based on the service we were providing to him. One very fateful day in Redstone Arsenal, Alabama, when we were telling the commands and staff about this problem, they asked us about remote viewing. They actually put Offentarg's book out of a briefcase and put it on the table and said, what do we do to protect ourselves from this?
Skip would soon be thrown into a classified military investigation. At the time, the United States military was working with experts Russell Targ and Dr. Harold Puthoff at the Stanford Research Institute on the phenomenon of psychic spies.
Dr. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ were studying at Stanford Research Institute a phenomena of people's ability to describe locations that were distant from them in space, distant from them in time, by mental means alone. Now, in esoteric terms, we might call that clairvoyance, but they tried to put a different name on it that sounded a little bit more scientific, sounded more acceptable, called remote viewing. And when I read their work, I was reading it through the eyes of a counterintelligence specialist, thinking, if this is true, if what these scientists are doing is true, then this is something that I haven't been doing for 9 years. I'm supposed to be a specialist in figuring out what enemy agents might do, and this isn't something I had been thinking about at all. That was a keynote day in my life and was the beginning of the next 10 years in my life in becoming involved in a U.S. government counterintelligence effort in remote viewing. I came to discover that this program that I thought was a very interesting program and was a threat, and we really ought to do something about this, had been ongoing for a number of years, funded by classified sources within the government. So the work that Stanford Research had published were just a few little studies, not revealing the totality of the effort that the government had been involved with for a number of years. In the early experimentation of remote viewing at Stanford Research Institute, they found not only in trying to figure out how does this work, they looked into physics explanations. Maybe it's really ultra low frequency waves. Well, if that's the case, then the size of the object remote viewed and shielding could be put into effect. So they tried doing very small things inside thimble boxes, then microdots, and then atomic structures, and they found size didn't matter. Then they used submarines doing remote viewing experiments 2 miles down in the ocean. Didn't matter. Did not block this low wave frequency. So they dismissed an electromagnetic explanation for this. Then they found, quite interestingly, in several experiments, that time didn't seem to matter. The normal way to run a remote viewing experiment back in the early days was like, as children, we would play hide and seek. One scientist would get a randomly generated target in a sealed envelope, go out and get in their car, and go to this place that they didn't know when they left in their car where they were going. They would open the envelope and go to this place. The person doing the remote viewing, the perceiving, would be locked in a laboratory room and simply told to describe the location of this person at 10 o'clock. And the arrangements were you're supposed to be at this other place at 10 o'clock and interact with the target in some way. If the target happened to be a tower, climb to the top of the tower. If the target happened to be a restaurant, order something to eat. And collecting over hundreds and hundreds of experiments, there was a statistical match between the descriptions and where they actually went that reinforced this. Well, along came an accident in science in which the person was on the way to the target. It wasn't 10 o'clock yet. And the person doing the perceiving said, I know where they're going. And he said, well, okay, describe where they're going. And he drew perfectly the location where they were. And so then they were saying, how could this be? We know that it doesn't depend on size and it's not electromagnetic, But if they haven't even got there yet, how is it that you could know that? There was a guy named Pat Price did that. And Pat Price made another time mistake that led to the understanding about time and distance not mattering. The target location where the person went was a public swimming pool where kids were playing and there were two different sized pools and so forth. And yet, Pat Price described this as being an area of pools of water, 2 water towers, and it was a sewage processing plant. And so they said, well, look, you did have pools of water, and you were probably confused, and that's why you called this a sewage treatment plant. And there was moving water, but the towers you drew weren't there. You probably just imagined them, which, by the nature of many remote viewing transcripts, there's wrong information in there. There's enough in there that statistically validates, and then there's some things like, I don't know why you drew those towers in there. It wasn't until 25 years later, when the city published the historical records, that location used to be a water treatment plant. So there's this question of slippage in time then. And over the years now, this has been ongoing for more than 30 years, it seems that once you say this is a remote viewing situation, this information was produced by a remote viewer, all of the concepts of time and space or distance just don't apply. It just doesn't apply. It's no more difficult to describe something with remote viewing across the street 10,000 miles away or on another planet. It just doesn't matter. So in 1977, I met Bob Monroe. One of the methods I investigated was the HemiSync technology at the Monroe Institute. Now, at that time, this was all deeply classified, not declassified until 1995. So in 1977, when I met Mr. Monroe, I couldn't say to him, gee, I train psychic spies for the government. How would your system work? I could not say those words to him. But I did develop a friendship and a rapport, and he described his technology, allowed me to experience that technology, and eventually we wound up training some of our remote viewers in this HemiSync process.
After a 35-year legacy at the Monroe Institute, Skip retired as the Institute's president in 2012. After the 2009 premiere of the Path After Life documentary, the Monroe Institute became interested in the works of William Buhlman and now facilitates workshops at the Institute. With over 40 years of documented out-of-body experiences, William has become one of America's top leading experts in the OBE phenomenon.
Well, I was a confirmed agnostic for quite a long time, up to 1972. I had more or less rejected all kinds of spiritual beliefs and the whole concept of a hereafter. When I was in college back in 1972, a friend of mine actually had a spontaneous out-of-body experience. And he told me about it, and it changed his life. It blew him away, and he made me want to pursue the entire topic because I wanted to experience what he experienced. So I became extremely interested in, picked up a book and began to read about the subject. And I found that there were actually methods available where you could self-initiate an out-of-body experience. An out-of-body experience is a broad term just for any form of consciousness, any perception of consciousness leaving the body. And even though at the time it sounded unbelievable and wild, I figured, why not? I'll give it a shot. If he had an experience, I don't see why I can't. So I decided to pursue it and tried this technique for a period of a month. It was an easy technique where I would actually visualize 3 objects in my mother's home, things that I had made. And at the time, I was living in a dorm-like structure that was about 5 miles from my mother's house. And every night as I went to sleep, I just visualized myself going to my mother's house and touching these three objects. And I felt myself there, and I tried to hold that as my last conscious thought as I drifted off to sleep. And for the first 2 weeks, nothing much happened, except for maybe a little increase in dream recall. And then on the end of the third week, suddenly I awoken, and I was startled to find that I felt different. And I was sleeping in a small single bed next to the wall. And when I reached out my arm, my hand actually entered the wall. And that's when it hit me that, oh my God, this is real. I did this. And I thought about standing, and the next thing I knew, I was standing by the foot of the bed. But it was totally real, totally conscious, and I was just ecstatic. I was like in shock. And I began to focus and look around the room, and I realized that I could see beyond the physical limits of my small little dorm room. And I noticed that there was someone watching me. And it was someone that had a long robe and a beard. And to be quite frank, it scared me. And the next thing I knew, snap, I was back in my body. And even though this was a brief experience, it totally changed my entire perception of reality. I mean, it changed my entire life. Because at that point, I realized that, yeah, this is for real. This is not somebody's hallucination. This is heavy-duty stuff. I knew that I had entered another reality, another whole dimension. And that night I couldn't sleep. I was so excited. I started writing down oh my God, other people live in these other dimensions. This is June of 1972. I became obsessed with the topic. I really started pursuing it heavily then. I started to explore different methods and began to have a lot of different experiences.
For the next 2 decades, William Buhlman would travel and experience other realities and dimensions apart from his physical body. He journaled these experiences and compiled them into his first book, Adventures Beyond the Body.
You know, out-of-body experiences have been documented and written about for thousands of years in all of the holy texts throughout history. The Bible is full of references to out-of-body experiences. In 2 Corinthians, St. Paul talks about, clearly, I was whether in the body or out of the body, I know not. In another case, the beginning of Revelations, the fourth line begins with, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a great voice. And then he goes on to describe this amazing journey that's obviously not in the physical world. And the entire chapter of Revelations, by many people, is viewed as an out-of-body experience. Another good one, probably one of the best, surprisingly, is in the Quran. The core story of Islam is Muhammad's night journey and how he leaves his body and enters these other dimensions. And he clearly states it in the Quran. He talks about entering 7 distinct dimensions of reality. And during this journey, he encounters different beings, different angels on each level of reality. And they give him knowledge. And it's actually quite fascinating, especially when you read this in a non-cultural. If you take away the cultural overtones of this experience, you begin to see this is clearly a vivid, profound, out-of-body experience that Muhammad had and that he interpreted. And there's no other way in my mind to interpret this. He's actually flying on this mystical animal, moving and communicating with Angel Gabriel and these other beings. And that is the core element of the entire religion, is based on this. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is another good reference point. The entire book has references to experiences beyond the body. It's actually a training manual. When you strip away all the very complicated, let's just say, mysticism that many people feel that it's attached to it, it's a training manual to go beyond your body and also to go beyond form-based realities. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, they say, go to the clear light of the void. It is repeated again and again and again. It's almost like the mantra of the book. It's amazing. The monks will surround someone who is ready to make this transition we call death, and they chant, basically, "O noble one, go to the clear light of the void." They're chanting this in Tibetan. Where in the West, of course, we're pumping people full of drugs and often ignoring them. It's all about keeping them comfortable. In Tibet and other Buddhist areas, they are actually trying to make their transition to a higher plane of reality. They call it the bardo, to go beyond the bardo, to go beyond the astral plane, to go beyond the form-based heavens, and to go to the higher realms of reality. And this is the entire training that I try to, as much as possible, to convey in my books. I try to get people to go beyond the astral plane in their out-of-body experience. Go to your higher self. It's the same concept as the Tibetan Buddhists. I am a big journaler. I believe in documenting everything. That's number one. So I journaled hundreds and hundreds of these of my own out-of-body experiences. It finally dawned on me in the 90s that, wow, I should write about this. There's a need for a manual that's practical manual on this topic. Ventures Beyond the Body is a result of basically, at the time, my 25 years experience. I put down a lot of my experience, not all of them, but some of them I considered pivotal experiences that had a huge impact on myself, like meeting my mother who had died and my uncle who had died. I go into specifics. What do you do to totally exit the body? Some people have their legs lift up and they can't get a part of their body free. Then, what do you do afterwards? Many people have poor vision. They can't perceive. I go into detail about what they should do, how to increase their perception. So I went into basically a training manual about how to become more and more proficient, how to address the issues that an out-of-body explorer will have.
In the back of his book and on William's website, the reader can take a survey to document their own experiences. And for the last 10 years, readers from around the globe have taken part in William's study into the out-of-body phenomenon.
I received an amazing response from my internet survey and from my book surveys. It was over 20,000 letters from over 42 countries. I have cases and cases of letters. It was amazing. Matter of fact, it was more than I could physically handle. So what I did, I compiled these experiences. A few years later, I published Secret of the Soul, which was a compilation of other people's experiences. And I thought, wow, people should know about this. Being a man, I was limited to a man's experiences, and I wanted to get a perception. What's it like for a child to have an experience? What's it like for a pregnant woman to have an experience? What's it like for a teenager? What is it like for different kinds of people? Is it different for a French person? Is it different for an African? I wanted to know the answers to this. I published a lot of it in Secret of the Soul. I put the stats in there as far as I could go, especially on the vibrational state, about what do people perceive in the vibrational state, which is a prelude to an out-of-body experience for most people. In other words, how many people have paralysis? How many people hear noises? How many people have buzzing, humming sounds? What percentage of people hear a voice? What percentage of people are touched? What percentage of people are, let's just say, see or meet with a loved one or someone who is not in a physical body? And what I try to do is document, to the best of my ability, these percentages. Because I thought it was important, because a lot of people, up to that point, nobody had really acknowledged the idea of a vibrational state. People talked about it, but there was no evidence. And by the vibrational state, I mean the state that occurs immediately before and after an out-of-body experience. Because based on my research, about 80% of people that have an out-of-body experience will have some kind of energy event that's associated with it. And it's an inner energy event, even though it may not feel it to people. But you'll feel a buzzing sound, for instance, or you'll feel many people will begin to feel numb and then paralyzed, and then a buzzing sound will resonate through their entire body. It's almost like, I write about it as like a jet engine. But your physical body will become paralyzed. That's universal, because you have to let go of the physical body. to have an out-of-body experience. So it's actually quite logical.
The survey results William collected were staggering. Some of the most unique examples of spontaneous out-of-body experiences are those that occur due to intense pain, physical and mental stress, illness, and other traumatic incidents. In the book, The Secrets of the Soul, William documents childhood out-of-body experiences ranging from 4-year-olds to teenagers. It is important for people to be reminded just how natural the out-of-body state was when they were children, before their belief systems were constructed.
Children naturally have out-of-body experiences because in the younger the child, the more prevalent they are, because children are not as indoctrinated. They're not as contaminated by the culture as adults. It's that simple.
When you're young, 3, 4, 5, you kind of have one foot in this reality and one foot in the other. You're a little more in touch with things like that. But as you get more centered in this physical reality, again, that stuff kind of goes away. Yeah, 3-year-olds are more intuitive. 5 and 6-year-olds do out of body all the time. You know, they're more connected, but eventually that just, again, fades like a dream. You know, goes away and then they're no longer connected that way.
Especially up to the age before puberty, they're very open. And especially between the ages of 4 and 6 or 7, that is where I receive most of my letters. I would say over 1,000 just in that age group of parents that are saying that their children not only having an experience, they're having multiple experiences. Parents were taking their children to the psychologist because they were entering the vibrational state. Their children are hearing vibrations, they're hearing sounds, their kids are talking about floating out of their body. I mean, their kids are talking about meeting their aunt. Unfortunately, in our society, what do most parents say to their children? It was just a dream. It's, wow, what an imagination you have. Oh, you talk to grandmom. Yeah, right. They don't accept it as real. Everything's a dream. And that's not the way it is. And nowadays, people are beginning to awaken to that.
At night, a lot of kids fight about bedtime, going to bed, and you know, I don't want to go to bed, I want to stay up and do this and so forth and so on. I was always eager to go to bed because for me, it was like watching television. And many times I would, at night, jump out the window and fly over to my friend's house and play with my friends. And well, that's what everybody does at night. I mean, that's why we sleep. Sometimes we're awake and we do this and then we go to bed at night so that we can go do this other stuff. But along with that process, I was quite old, 8, 9 years old, and had a bedwetting problem. I remember very distinctly one night waking up in bed and I was mad. I was just furious and I was screaming and tantruming. And my mother came running in and said, "What's wrong? What's wrong? Did you hurt yourself? Are you okay?" And I looked at her and I said, "I remember. I got up and I went into the bathroom. I sat on the toilet. And when I began to pee, I woke up here and I was all wet. I am mad." And she'd grab me and she cuddled me and she says, "Oh, that's okay, you're fine." She said, "You know, you have to remember to take your body with you when you go to the bathroom." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she says, "Well, sometimes you're in your body and sometimes you're not in your body. But when it's time to go to the bathroom, you always have to check that you're going to take your body with you in there." And I was like, oh. And I never wet my bed again.
There are no limits to the type of experiences a person can have once they leave the physical world during an OBE. Shared experiences in the non-physical have been reported by many others.
My wife and I have had experiences together that are quite remarkable because there's no limits to what can happen. For many people, this may sound strange. It really provides a tremendous opportunity for personal growth for people because it's also a powerful confirmation that their experience is valid. Because then you come back and you're sharing it with another person. I think I had over 30 experiences that people have sent to me where they were together on another plane of existence, totally conscious.
When I was much older, probably late 20s, when I was going out of body then purposefully, this was after I'd been out to Monroe Laboratory, then I would go get my son, who was at the time like 5, 6, somewhere in that same bracket, and we'd go out together, and it was like a fun thing we would do in the evenings, and we'd go out, we would have adventures. It was always a lot of fun, and it would blow his mom's mind in the morning because he would tell all about them. The thing that would blow her mind is that I had already told her about them an hour before he woke up, and then she'd get his story, which would of course be from his perspective. But so that's a good father and son activity.
I have about 15 mothers who have written to me that have actually had communication with their future children. Matter of fact, a couple of these women are naming their children the same name that they were told that they are called now. That's how clear. In other words, they meet the individual in the astral plane and they say, my name is Robert and I'm going to be your child. And it sounds like, oh my God, come on. But people are relating this.
I have had experiences myself where my wife and I have had shared distant experiences. Where were you? Well, there was a busload of people and we were feeding him. And I said, well, did you see when the guy in the blue truck went by? He said, yeah, but he didn't want to eat at the table where we were serving the food, kind of a thing. And then we go on about our lives. We don't think any big deal about it. We just know that we were elsewhere together and we did something. And we don't start a church over it or anything else. We just accept that as those things happen.
In August of 2009, Dennis Mennerit attended one of Tom's workshops in Toronto, Canada, which allowed the opportunity to film and discuss in more detail one of the first profound shared experiences they had at Robert Monroe's laboratory.
Bob had an exercise for Dennis and I to go out of body together, and he just kind of sprung that on us while we were there. So we were willing to try anything. We were in the try anything mode, and we decided we'd meet right up above the lab, and then we'd just go up together and see what happened. And we did. And it was, I think, about an hour and a half, close to 2 hours. I mean, there were a lot of specific things going on. It wasn't just that we sat in the void and, didn't say anything to each other. It was a pretty eventful experience. And we came back, and the lights are always bright once you come out of that dark, absolutely black hole that you're in. And we stumbled out in the light and stumbled up to the control room. And there was Bob, his usual little, sardonic wit. And he kind of had this little smirk on his face. And, do you guys really think you were together? That sort of thing. And we said, it seemed like it, yeah. I said, it seemed like it to me. And he said, yeah, well, it seemed like it to him because we hadn't talked about it at all. We still had no idea what each other had done. So that Bob turned around in his swivel chair and says, well, here, listen to this. And he flipped both the tape switches on. So Dennis's tape, which was made just between Dennis and Bob, and my tape, which was just made between me and Bob, and we could not hear each other. We were in isolation booths. Started to play at the same time. And there was Dennis and I interacting. There we were seeing the same things, describing the same kind of stuff, and it went on and on and on, and my mouth kind of fell open, the jaw hit the floor, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is real. And that's the way I felt, and I repeated that 50 times over the next couple of weeks because there was no way to justify that. We carry our doubt to a pretty far extreme. I mean, we're not going to give in and say this is real until we really know there's absolutely no other choice. And just telling us that it was 1,000 to 1 that we could do what we had done, that wasn't enough. But this was enough because there was no wiggle room in this. There was no other way that this could have happened other than Dennis and I were out of body together, and we saw the same things, and we had the same conversations, and it sounded like what you'd expect. If you had two different tapes of a conversation with people, it was different. We obviously didn't use the same words to describe everything, but that was because we were two different people. We have two different perspectives, but it was so close and so tight together that it was just astounding, and Bob was just thrilled. His eyes were lit up. It was like, it was like Christmas for Bob, and it was like my jaw dropped to the ground, and oh my God, for me, and that was the big one. And after that, there was no doubt in my mind that what I was doing was exploring a different reality frame, and that it was every much as real as this reality frame, and it just wasn't any longer any doubt. So After that, it was not trying to figure out, is this real, which is really what our mission was for the first year or two that we were there. We were trying to determine, is this real? Of course, Bob knew it was real, but that was Bob. We didn't know it was real until we could prove that for ourselves.
I think a lot of the things that we did were kind of subjective, and you go through it, and when you're doing it, it seems to be very valid, but then you get a little space and you say, well, does that really happen, or, am I making that up, kind of things. And so you really didn't have a lot of concrete, objective data to prove, that the experiences were real. But something like this, is just, like you said, you just can't ignore things like this.
After that, the mission changed. It was no longer, is this real? It was, how does this work? What is going on here? What are the limits? What are the constraints? What are the rules? So my whole focus on it shifted from, is this real, to what's going on?
Our scientists and explorers don't stop at the out-of-body experience. Instead, they begin to research, study, and try to understand the inner workings of the non-physical. It is no longer a compilation of many experiences, but now it becomes a way of life.
Once you get started in something like this, you don't just say, oh, that was fun, forget about it and do something else. This is a way of being. It's more than a way of life. It's a way of being. And being a physicist, I'm interested in learning how things work. That's what I do. I try to find out how reality works. So I just kept experimenting and kept studying it and kept researching it, kept going places, kept exploring, pushing the boundaries back, trying to figure out why. Why does it work this way? Why is it sometimes this way and sometimes that way? What's the difference? What are the rules here? What it's about is consciousness. Okay, so if I were to start with an explanation, I'd say, start with consciousness. Well, all of us have consciousness, right? We're all conscious, and that means we're aware. What we're aware of is our physical reality. That's our universe, our planets and our solar system. We're not really too much aware of that, but we're aware of our universe and we're a part of it. Well, if you think about that awareness, you realize that awareness is just data. It's just information. I see you, you see me, but what's that? It's data. It's modulated electromagnetic waves that are bouncing off of me and you, and we're processing it in the brain and interpreting those electromagnetic pulses as people. So we're taking the data and we're interpreting it to form our reality. Well, everything's like that. All the senses are like that. Everything you hear, see, smell, touch, it's just data, input. And then you interpret that data to be something. Well, of course, there's also rules. There's rules that how the data can relate to each other. So, my data says that, there is a wall. It also, my experience tells me I cannot walk through it. It's a solid object, and that's, one of Newton's laws, that two things can't occupy the same point at the same time.
We know that all of these things are just mental projections in our mind's eye. It's really data bits being processed by our brains. The fact that we think we agree that we're seeing the same thing and call this reality is a supposition. There's no proof in physics of a Cartesian reality. Now, can we extend that proposition then? If two people meet in another dimension and report back the same information, can we then assume? Is there an implication that this then is real? If more than one person can relate to that?
Think of consciousness as the fundamental reality. We are consciousness. Period. Consciousness is digital, so it deals with data. Data with rules creates realities. This is our reality. Physics is the rule set. So are we the only reality? Is this virtual reality it? Well, the answer to that is no. There's lots of virtual realities. When you take this as a premise, then you can explain a lot of things that are now unexplainable. Using this premise of virtual realities explains physics better than physics can be explained without it. This model of reality actually solves a whole lot of mysteries. If you think of it this way, it solves a lot of things that can't happen. The paranormal things and the UFO things and those other big mysteries, where they're dealing with aliens and the aliens take them up to their spaceship and do experiments on them and the rest of that. A lot of that has to do with things that are happening to them in another reality system. That doesn't mean it's not happening to them. It just means that it's not happening to them in this reality system. So if somebody happened to be in their room that night with a movie camera, they wouldn't see any of it. This person sees it all and experiences it, and indeed he is taken up to some place, and indeed he is, people are doing things to him, and so on, and these other beings are beings that are traveling around and are, studying other beings, and so this stuff happens, but it's not the way they think. It's not the UFO who travels in a saucer and the saucer people come down and snatch them up out of their beds. That's not happening. That's just what they rationalize to explain it. It's like, are all these people liars? Are they all psychotic? And why do all these psychotic people see similar things? It's more to it than just people who are nuts. Just like with the little kids. It's more to it than just kids who are hallucinating. So you put mind-altering drugs to keep them from hallucinating, right? They are getting their data from this physical matter frame, and they're getting some from a different physical matter frame. So, but they can't separate it. So they're parallel processing. Now, I do that all the time, but I know what I'm doing, so it's not like I'm confused. I know there's two frames. If you know there's two, if you have two TVs and each has a different ball game on it, that doesn't confuse you. You know there's two things going on. If you don't know that, and you're just listening to two ball games, at once, and you don't realize that it's two ball games, then it's, what is that jumble? You don't understand it. Well, they don't understand it, so they think it's all in this reality, because in their mind there is only one reality, and it's this one, and it's physical. Therefore, when they see something from another reality, they think it's here. Just like the little children who see things and have their playmates. Those playmates are things that they're doing in their mind. They're non-physical playmates, but to them they're physical playmates, because when they see them, they're here, because this is the only reality they've got in their mind. They don't intellectually say, I'm parallel processing. That's too big a thought for a 5-year-old. Your consciousness. Suddenly you're plugged into a different data stream. You can't tell that from here. So you say it is here. You think it's here. Now you see things floating around, because they don't float around in your reality, so that's really weird, and you have these real weird stories about aliens and spaceships and stuff. So most of it is a very similar kind of thing. It's just spontaneous. These things happen spontaneously to some people. Bob Monroe spontaneously had out-of-body experiences. Some people just spontaneously will plug into another reality frame for a while, and it goes away.
As you begin to explore in altered states of consciousness, you will find the universe has countless dimensions and realities to be explored. This universe is multidimensional, and the places of exploration are almost limitless.
Well, let's go back for a minute to Bob Monroe's stories. In his first experimentation of being in bed, feeling this sort of vibration of puffing up and collapsing, puffing and collapsing, puffing and collapsing, that he got over the fear of that. And then when he could feel himself sort of loose, as it were, then he would push that other hand that he perhaps thought he had down through the floor. And he could feel the insulation and the nails and so forth, and he'd pull his hand back up. And then he began to experiment in his house, and then his neighborhood, and then there were a few earthly places he went to. And then there were beings that he met and said, come with me and I'll show you something else. He called that in his first book, Locale 2, meaning that Locale 1 was this earth stuff. And he became fascinated in this other realm called Locale 2, which was just, there's here and then there's the other place. This is Locale 1, that's Locale 2. In his later books, he found there are many other places, other worlds, other dimensions. And this is really boring and primitive,
This is just one. There's hundreds of virtual realities out there. This consciousness system didn't just put all its eggs in this one basket. There's other virtual realities, and they're all different. They have different rules. They're not all the same rule sets. So there's a big, complex world out there in the world of consciousness.
I found it amazing when I was leaving my body just how many different realities existed and how many dimensions. And many of the old models that were presented, for instance, the 7 within 7, I have found they are not accurate. For instance, the astral plane is filled with thousands, countless realities and vibrational levels. It was immense. It's absolutely immense beyond my expectations. It would lifetimes just to explore that.
We're not the center of this physical universe. We're not the center of the conscious universe. We're just individual conscious entities trying to grow up. This physical matter reality has spawned, billions of different life forms, right? We probably have a billion just different kind of insects. There's lots of life forms here. Well, the other reality frames haven't been sleeping all this time. They've also spawned billions of life forms. And the life forms fit the rule set that defines the virtual reality. Okay, so there's things that exist there that don't exist here because we have a narrow rule set here. There's a lot of beings out there that never even heard of this reality frame. The humans on Earth are like a fly speck somewhere. They don't know it exists. They have their own systems that they work with. So it's not like we are the center of this consciousness universe.
Once your consciousness leaves this physical world and enters the non-physical, your mental focus and state of mind drives your experience into these other realities. In other words, consciousness is moved by intent.
The where you go to, apparently from our ability to understand, based on our own experience and our command of the language, the where you go to seems to depend upon your intent.
Consciousness is moved by intent, conscious intent, or you might call it will. It's what you intend to happen. So I can send you a message by intending to send you a message. Well, that really happens anyway when we talk. Before the word comes out of my mouth, I have an intention of what it is I want to say. I take that intention of the communication, I put it into thoughts. The thoughts go into symbols. The symbols come out as acoustic vibrations, and then you get it and do the opposite. You take the acoustic vibrations, turn them into symbols. The symbols mean things, turns back into thought. So we're going through this little process here.
So the way in which you can declare or purify or objectify your intent seems to be the navigational beacon or tool that takes you to wherever this other place is, other than this local world, or what Bob called Locale 1.
A normal OBE can be turned into a highly spiritual experience by you focusing your mind into your intention. Because our intention rules. Our intention rules our experiences. This opens up a door to all kinds of, I feel, profound and advanced spiritual development, far beyond anything that's taught today.
Now, you have to focus that intent, and you have to focus it without a lot of noise. That's why usually meditation is first, because that's how you get rid of the noise. You get that clear, still spot where you're just point consciousness, no chatter going on, then you're focused. If you can maintain that focus and have a clear intent of what you want to accomplish, then you can accomplish it.
All of our form-based realities, physical and non-physical, they're all created by thought. Everything is a thought form in a way, if you could look at it that way, an energetic thought form. And yes, there's many negative thought forms because humanity, 6 billion of us, are creating negative thoughts. So yes, when you leave your body, of course, there's going to be negative things encountered. I'll be the last person to say that that's not a fact. The point is, though, we are far more powerful as the creators. We create our own reality. We create it when we leave our body. We create our own reality in the physical world. There's basically like attracts like. There's an energetic connection to all things. And if you are not harboring negative thoughts, you're not going to be attracted to negative thoughts. This is one of the basic things I found about leaving my body.
So if you get a whole lot of people on the planet thinking disaster, earthquakes, terrible things, it's all going to end, that helps bring about that reality. The natural way that the consciousness system works is that it produces your fears. What you are afraid of, it will materialize for you. If you're really afraid that nobody will like you, then you act in a way that makes nobody like you. Because you're afraid that nobody will like you, you will be withdrawn, or you will be aggressive, or you will be some other way that makes people not like you. You make your fears come true. Well, that's not just psychology. That's the way consciousness works. The whole conscious system, that's part of its fundamental nature. You will make your fears come true. You create your own reality.
So most of the fear-based beliefs that dominate our society today, unfortunately, they're totally unnecessary. Fear of evil influence, fear, there's so many fears out there that are hindering people's progress. They're totally unnecessary. And they're quite archaic, actually, especially these ideas of devils and Satan and blah, and it goes on and on and on. All of these things are man-made creations.
There'd be some religious people that if you said, oh, yes, I go out of body, they'd say, oh, work of the devil, or something like that. I mean, there are people who are like that. They're very narrow in their reality system. They have very, very narrow ideas, and they're trapped in that box. If they get in a mindset with beliefs and things that narrow them into a small box, it's very difficult for them to evolve, to be what it is they naturally are, which is consciousness.
Many of these biblical tales of devils and demons may have been misinterpreted all throughout history. Think of it. Imagine if they were all misinterpreted, and all these stories of devils and demons, and maybe they were all just confrontations with someone's fear that was misinterpreted. Maybe. Why not? In other words, any confrontation with an evil entity is actually a positive. It's an opportunity for us to grow. And I know many people can't accept. They feel this is a strange concept. But I know this to be a fact. It's a powerful fact. One of the advantages of self-initiated OBEs is that it allows you the opportunity to confront and resolve your own fear.
If you have fear, if let's say you have fear that you can't get back when you're in that reality, there's a big wall, well, that's your fear. It's not that somebody just constructed a wall there to be mean to you. You're running into your fear. If you run into beings that are not nice to you and struggle with you, that's your fear that you're dealing with. Those are your own demons, so to speak. If you have belief systems, you'll run into things that work with those belief systems. So if you're very, religious, you may see angels and people walking around in robes and things like that. If you're not, you may see other things.
I like to tell a story real briefly. I think we'll clarify this whole thing, because there's a lot of fear about negative influences. I know that. A lot of people still feel that people need to be exorcised of evil spirits and all these other aspects. This I think will clarify it. I once had an out-of-body experience where I had a normal separation. I left my body and I walked through. Often I will walk. I'll focus door now is my focus. I go through the door. I'm out into my hallway of my home. It's still physical-like. And I realize that suddenly there are steps going up and going down. There's steps going up to a very bright golden light, and there's steps going down to a very dark, dank place. And I'm standing at this landing between these two realities. And I'm standing there in awe, really, of, oh my God, look at this beautiful staircase going up and this dark staircase going down. And I'm standing here just staring. And as I do, I realize that there's a dark energy, dark figure at the bottom of the steps. And this dark creature is starting to move up the steps. And I didn't know what it was. I just stood there almost frozen with fear as this creature starts to come up the steps towards me. And as it emerges from the darkness of the basement or whatever, I realize that it's a giant sloth about 9 foot tall with the face of a dog and huge claws that were like 4 inches long. And it's moving up the steps slowly. And it looks like it's just going to tear me to shreds. And I'm standing there, and I'm not always brave. If I wanted to avoid this scenario, I could just think of my body, and I'm instantly back in my body. to avoid it. But I'm stood there frozen, basically, with fear, as this creature starts to come up to me. And it literally wraps its huge, hairy arms around me and grasps me. And then this giant dog face come down and lick my face. And then the entire creature dissolved away. And at that moment, I felt this huge burst of energy flowing through me. And then I realized, oh my God, I just felt wave after wave of energy flowing through me. The creature's gone, dissolved away. And I realized instantaneously that what the heck was this monster? It was a manifestation of my own fear. I just confronted a manifestation, a collection, you could say, of my own fear. And in doing so, by standing there, by being firm, whatever you want to call it, even though I was fearful, I confronted my own fear. There's a powerful lesson in this. I've had many different scenarios of this occur in my life, in my OBEs. They're not independent life forms as such. Unfortunately, people limit themselves by their acceptance of these negative beliefs, and they don't even realize they've done it.
Whatever you believe creates a limitation. I would venture to say that all beliefs are basically limitations, and then you learn to work with those limitations or work around those limitations with some other way. People go through all these rituals. First thing they do is they give affirmations and incantations, and I'm going in to visit the non-physical, but I only want to meet people that are good, and I don't want to meet any monsters, and please don't hurt me. And they go through all of the stuff that they got to say first before they can go. Well, they have to go through that because they're fearful. And that is a tool that they use to feel like now they're separate from it. Now they're invulnerable. Now they have their shield. Okay, with my handy shield, I'll be all right, and I won't have to worry about it. So now they can go forth because they got their handy shield on. Many of us have tools that we create that help us do these things. And all the tool is a device to help us focus our intent. The shield is unnecessary, but it lets them intend to be unaccessible. It lets them intend to be invulnerable. Now they have the intent that they're invulnerable and they won't get hurt. Well, now they're invulnerable. So, hey, it works. With practice, you can produce tools that suit you, or you can eventually learn to let go of tools. So we don't use tools. But that's harder because we don't think that way. Our minds just don't work that way. So if you just go out and try to do it without tools, you'll probably find it doesn't work very well for you because it works for your intellect. So belief basically gets in the way. It's because of our beliefs that we need all these tools. If we didn't have these beliefs, we wouldn't need all these tools. So the tool sets are ways to get around our beliefs, really, to circumvent the beliefs that are limitations. Now, the meditation tool is a tool that helps you get to that clear space where you've quieted all the thoughts. One way people meditate is to bring up an image, and they look at that image. And the reason that works is that the image, because it busies their mind with this image, they start forgetting. All the other thoughts start to go away because they get consumed with this one image. And then once they're in this alone space, there's nothing but them and the image. They let the image go, and guess what? They're in meditation state. That's another way to meditate. Bring up a picture of a soccer ball, okay? Then let the soccer ball rotate. You can see the little black things going around the side as it rotates. And rotate it faster and rotate it slower, and then slow it down. And pretty soon, in order to do that, you're so focused on that soccer ball that everything else is gone. And then let the soccer ball go. And now you're alone, if you can maintain that state. If you believe that now you're just back here without your soccer ball, then the state goes away, and you were in that altered state, but now you jump right back to this state. So again, that belief gets in your way. So see, it's really very simple.
Having an out-of-body experience is not a difficult state of consciousness to obtain. We make it difficult with our fears, beliefs, and by making our tools complex and sacred, preventing us from reaching our destination.
How do you get there? Well, you just shift your consciousness. Well, that sounds like, that's too easy. I just can't shift my consciousness, I can't do that. Well, that's because you have all these beliefs, you have these limitations, you have these other things that get in the way. You could You know, if you could, it's not a matter of learning something new, it's a matter of letting go of something old. It always requires us doing something. It doesn't have to do with doing, it has to do with being. It has to do with you being consciousness. You can just connect to another reality frame just because you want to, because your intent is to connect to that frame. You don't have to go lie down, you know, get into this state, get in oscillation states, you know, get out of body, and go. You don't have all that process. It's just a process to make us feel better because we feel like we have to do something to get somewhere. If we really understood ourselves as consciousness, you can go there just because you intend to go there. And you can do it immediately, and you don't have to first get real fuzzy in the mind and do something weird. You know, you don't have to use tools. You don't have to really do any of that. You know, I've had any number of people say, Tom, I want to go out of body. I want to experience these other reality frames, but I get up there and I meditate and I get that, and nothing happens. You know, well, I tell them, well, if you get there and you're in that point consciousness, it's not that nothing happens. It already has happened. You're there. You know, intend something, you know, go somewhere, do something, have an experience. Well, they're blocking all that out. They have this idea of what it's supposed to be like, and unless that happens, then nothing's happened yet. So basically, they're there in idle, sitting there with their mind closed. Nothing happens. So, you know, they are the problem why nothing's happening. You know, it's not that somebody has to go pull them out of their body. They need another technique. You know, what's the magic word? You know, how do you do this? You have to do it with your head facing north. You know, you go through all of these things, and that's not really what you need. It's like, go to that still, quiet space, have an intent. But please, have an intent that you can then check to see whether it's actually having an effect, whether it's real. That you're not just making it up, that you're imagining. That's how you can tell the difference. Otherwise, you can't tell the difference. It's probably another good point to talk about. How do you tell the difference? You have to do evidential things. So it may be statistical evidence. You may have to do it over and over again, but you can collect evidence. Go someplace that you've never been, look around, see what it looks like, and then go look it up. Go get Google Maps and look at it and see if that's what it looks like. Go visit some individuals, call them up and see, what were you doing? You know, were you just sitting in the kitchen, you know, having, you know, a conversation? You have to do these kinds of things to collect evidence, because otherwise you never know. So, okay, I had this adventure, but I just made it all up. You know, it's just in my mind. Well, of course it's in your mind. That's the point. It's supposed to be in your mind. But to know whether or not your intent is traveling, your intent is getting that data, that real data, or whether it's just your intellect making up data to satisfy a need. Those are two different things. And the only way that you can tell the difference is by doing things that are evidential. That will then convince you. Once you've done enough things that, gee, I couldn't have known that, you know, any other way other than I got that information, then you know, well, here's the state I was in. Then you try to duplicate that. If your evidence comes back and says, nope, we weren't even home, you know, then you try to say, well, let's not do it that way again. It's trial and error. You have to practice at these altered states with your intent, with focusing it, how you focus it, adjust your tools, practice. You get better at it. It takes a long time. I've been doing this for 35 years, you know, so that gives me an advantage over somebody that's just been doing it for 25 years. You get better at it with practice, like anything else.
So it's like a skill. It becomes something that you practice, and the more you practice, the more you're able to do it. For instance, we have one exercise in our Gateway Voyage where people go out and they actually practice moving, changing their awareness as they're out in natural environments, so that we can help people to realize that all of these ranges of experience are available to us at any time. But what I think begins to happen, for me anyway, is that there's a more subtle form of communication that happens, that you begin to pay attention more. And I think it's really more a matter of attention than it is anything else. You get little insights, maybe little intuitions, answers to questions that seem to come out of nowhere. Or maybe somebody will say something and you realize that, you know, that's not just that person talking. There's a larger piece of information that's coming through. And when you begin to move through life like that, then you also understand that our world is speaking to us all the time, if we will pay attention. And therein lies the difficulty, is paying attention. It's a lot of fun to be able to move into other dimensions. It's wonderful. But I think the real challenge is how do we begin to integrate those so that we are on a frequency, a wavelength where we are truly present, but also truly aware of other information that may be coming to us. There's something very wonderful about this reality. We are here for a purpose. And so I think it's very important that as we look at out-of-body issues, that we also look very carefully at in-body issues, so that we really value what's going on in this world.
In the totality of all the universe and all the dimensions of which we occupy, this is very brief, very momentary, very minuscule, and yet not unimportant in the grand totality of everything, which is the true nature of who we really are. In a metaphor, my little finger is pretty small in the totality of who I am in total, but I'd hate to lose it.
A lot of people are looking for real answers. They're tired of more beliefs. They're tired of being told to believe this and to read this, and they want to know based on their own experiences. And that's what this does. It opens up that potential to actually see yourself beyond your physical body, to prove to yourself your own immortality, which is incredibly powerful, just that in itself. It's mind-boggling. That often just awakens people spiritually, because then they begin to really focus on their quest or their path inward, beyond the physical world.
Maybe your beliefs have been shifting, or your initial fears have been dissolved away. The tools have been offered to focus your intention and to satisfy your curiosity. Now is the time where we can find our own answers and explore what is beyond the physical.